When my parents delivered their ultimatum, threatening a lawsuit unless I handed my house over to my sister, my lawyer's burst of laughter was the sound of my chains breaking. I was finally, irrevocably free. Growing up, the blueprint of my childhood was stark and simple. Serena was adorned with the latest fashions, supported by private tutors, and whisked away on fantastical vacations. My inheritance was a series of lectures on the virtues of hard work and the importance of independence. By the time I was 16, I was flipping burgers at a greasy roadside diner, the smell of burnt oil clinging to my clothes, while she was packing for a summer of artistic exploration across Europe. When I dared to question this disparity, my parents calmly advised me to understand my priorities. The translation was brutally clear. Serena's future was a blue-chip investment, while mine was a lesson in self-sufficiency. At first, I wasn't bitter. I simply accepted it as the natural order of things. Parents invest their resources in the child they believe has the highest potential for success, while the other learns to fend for himself. And so, I did. I put myself through college, navigating a maze of cramped apartments with roommates who conveniently forgot their share of the rent, and I meticulously sidestepped the social life my peers reveled in. With every meager paycheck, I squirreled a little something away. I wasn't entirely sure what I was building this safety net for. All I knew was that no one else would ever be there to catch me if I fell. After graduation, the path before me forked into two options: a dead-end job with low pay or a leap of faith. I chose the leap. I poured my life savings into opening a small, unassuming auto repair shop. It was far from glamorous, and that first year was a grueling test of endurance. It was a blur of late nights under fluorescent lights, punishingly long hours, and weekends spent with my arms submerged in engine grease. But slowly, painstakingly, it paid off. By the 5th year, my business was stable enough that I was making enough money to seriously contemplate the dream of owning my own house. Naturally, my parents were well aware of my financial progress. I had occasionally voiced my ambition to finally own a home instead of perpetually renting a shoebox-sized apartment. Each time I brought it up, they would exchange a knowing grin, and the conversation would pivot. My mother would let out a theatrical sigh. "Oh, Serena has been struggling so terribly. Rent is just astronomical these days." My father would then chime in, "She just needs a little leg up." It would mean the world to her to have a stable place to call her own. They never stated it directly, but the subtext was as clear as glass. I was expected to be the solution to her problems. It never seemed to matter that Serena's difficulties were entirely of her own making. While I was pulling 16-hour shifts, she was curating her best life on social media. Exotic vacations, designer handbags, and evenings spent at trendy, upscale restaurants. Yet paradoxically, she was the one who perpetually needed assistance. And then there was the money. Over the years, I had been financially supporting my parents, covering unexpected home repairs, surprise medical bills, and even slipping them extra cash when they claimed things were tight. I didn't resent it at first. They were my parents, after all. But then I began to notice small discrepancies, like my mother sporting a new designer purse every few months, or my father suddenly wearing a fancy new watch. I initially chalked it up to them being frugal and saving wisely. Then the truth dawned on me. The money was going to Serena. My parents weren't struggling at all. They were simply acting as a conduit, funneling my hard-earned assistance directly into her lavish lifestyle. The final illusion shattered when I overheard a conversation that changed everything. I had stopped by my parents' house to drop off a tool my dad had borrowed. I didn't plan on staying, but as I walked past the kitchen, I heard my name, so I did what any person in my position would do. I froze, pretending to be absorbed in my phone, and I listened. "I'm sure he'll do the right thing," my mother said, her voice confident. "He's so responsible. He's been saving for this for years." My father readily agreed. "It only makes sense. He can't expect his sister to struggle like this. He's her brother." Struggle, Serena. The same Serena who had never paid $1 of rent in her life and still relied on our parents to cover her mounting credit card debt. Something wasn't adding up, and then it hit me with the force of a physical blow. They were talking about my money, my house fund. I stood there in the hallway, my heart pounding against my ribs as the full scope of their plan settled over me. I was expected to buy a house, not for myself, but for Serena. And the most sickening part was their absolute certainty that I would simply go along with it, as if it were a foregone conclusion, as if it were my sacred duty. A primal urge to storm into the kitchen and demand an explanation surged through me, but I knew exactly how that would play out. They would twist my words, paint me as selfish and ungrateful. They'd invoke the sacred words of family and duty, and remind me how fortunate I was to have succeeded while poor Serena struggled so. I had heard that tired old song 1,000 times before. I needed to think. I slipped out of the house without a word. That night, I lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling of my tiny studio apartment, the flickering fluorescent light in the kitchen a constant annoyance I hadn't gotten around to fixing. I replayed every instance I was told to wait my turn, every sacrifice I had made, every time I had swallowed my frustration and forced a smile. And I thought about Serena, wondering how she would react if she knew about their scheme. Would she feel a shred of guilt, a flicker of gratitude? Or would she simply assume it was her birthright? I got my answer the very next morning. Serena called me out of the blue, her voice practically vibrating with unearned excitement. She gushed about a new property she had found. "It's absolutely perfect," she chirped. 3 bedrooms, a huge backyard for a garden. I can finally move out on my own. I waited for the crucial part of the sentence, the part where she would explain her plan to pay for it, but it never came. Because in her mind, she didn't need one. My parents had clearly already assured her that it was a done deal. She then had the staggering audacity to tell me she'd be happy to let me crash in the guest room if I ever needed a place to stay. That was it. That was the moment the last thread of obligation snapped. I was done playing their game. The very next day, I did exactly what they expected me to do. I bought a house. But it wasn't the one they had picked out. I didn't tell a soul. There was no grand announcement. No lengthy explanations. I found a place that I loved, a modest but sturdy home, paid my deposit and signed the papers. It wasn't enormous, but it was mine. The very first thing in my entire life that was truly and completely mine. I thought I had some time before my family discovered my act of defiance. A few months, maybe even a year. But life has a funny way of accelerating timelines. I was in the middle of unpacking my new kitchen, happily peeling off the ridiculous live laugh love. Decals the previous owner had plastered everywhere when my phone began to erupt. A cascade of missed calls and frantic text messages from my mother, my father, Serena, and even distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Then, I saw the text that made my stomach plummet. "Why did we just hear from a realtor that you bought a house?" I had no idea how they found out. Maybe the agent let something slip to a mutual acquaintance. Maybe Serena had been stalking the same property listings. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I had made my move, and the real battle was just beginning. The instant that text message lit up my screen, I knew my peaceful housewarming period was officially over. My phone buzzed incessantly. Calls and texts, a chaotic mix of fury and feigned concern, all woven together with a single unifying thread: betrayal. I ignored them all. If I answered now, I'd be sucked into a vortex of their distorted narrative, a conversation designed to make me the villain. Instead, I turned my attention back to setting up my home. The previous owner had left behind some truly hideous floral wallpaper in the living room, and I decided that would be the most distressing thing I would deal with that day. Then, the doorbell rang. I knew who it was before I even looked. I could feel it in my bones. When I opened the door, my parents stood on my porch, looking less like a loving couple and more like a pair of auditors ready to discuss a serious breach of contract. My mother's face was a carefully constructed mask of disappointment and hurt, the same expression she perfected for when I forgot to call on a holiday. My father stood with his arms crossed, a power stance he used when preparing for a hostile negotiation. Before they could even step inside, I braced myself. The next 20 minutes unfolded exactly as I had predicted. A barrage of accusations, a tidal wave of guilt-tripping, and the grand finale, the "we're a family" speech. My mother lamented how distraught Serena was, how she had no idea where she would live now. My father made it abundantly clear that they had expected me to do the right thing. And my personal favorite, the reminder that after everything they had done for me, this was how I chose to repay them. Everything they had done for me. Like forcing me to pay them rent as a teenager, like making me fund my own schooling while they paid for Serena's designer wardrobe, like allowing me to work 2 jobs while she enjoyed weekend spa getaways. If anything, my repayment was already tenfold. I could feel my patience fraying at the edges, but instead of snapping, I remained silent, nodding along, letting them exhaust their talking points. I had learned long ago that arguing with them was pointless. They weren't here to listen. They were here to reinforce their own story. Then came the ultimatum. My mother, her voice dripping with artificial calm, informed me that I had 2 choices. I could either sign the house over to Serena, or I would be cut off from the family. I had to physically restrain myself from laughing out loud. Cut off from what exactly? The love and support that was always conditional. The same family that had never given me anything without expecting twice as much in return. I told them I would think about it, not because I intended to, but because I wanted them out of my house. They left with an air of victory, as if they had successfully cornered me into submission. I took a deep breath, walked into my kitchen, and pulled a cold beer from the fridge. I sat down and stared at my phone. More missed calls. Serena had finally texted, and I could guess the contents without even looking. Something dramatic about me ruining her life and how she had been counting on me. I opened it, and what I saw made my blood run cold. It was a message from Serena, but it wasn't meant for me. In her haste and fury, she had accidentally forwarded a text to our family group chat instead of to the friend she was messaging. The text laid out, in meticulous detail, the strategy she and my parents had concocted to break me down. How they would apply relentless pressure until I finally caved and handed over the keys. There it was, in black and white. The undeniable confirmation that none of this was about fairness or family. It was a calculated takedown, and I was the fool who was supposed to roll over and play dead. I took a screenshot, saved it, and then just sat there for a long minute. For the first time in years, I felt something new. Not anger, not sadness, but a profound and liberating clarity. They had never seen me as family. I was just a resource, a tool to be used when needed. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to explain myself. I was simply going to show them just how finished I truly was. The next morning, I began to make my moves. The following morning, I woke up with a clear and decisive plan. If my family wanted a war, they would get one, but it would be fought on my terms. I wasn't going to engage in their screaming matches or get dragged into their web of explanations. I was going to seize control of the narrative and make it unequivocally clear that I was done playing their twisted games. First, I fortified everything. I contacted my bank and put extra security measures on my accounts, ensuring only I could authorize any changes. I changed all my passwords, secured my important documents, and, feeling a touch paranoid but vindicated, I even had security cameras installed around my new house. Knowing my family's capacity for desperation, I wasn't putting anything past them. Next, I called a lawyer. I didn't think my parents had any legal standing, but I refused to take any chances. After I laid out the situation, my lawyer assured me that as long as the property and all finances were solely in my name, and I hadn't signed any agreement with Serena, I had nothing to worry about. It was a relief, but I was still proceeding with caution. Later that day, a text from Serena arrived. She was willing to talk, but only if I was ready to make things right. I ignored it. A few hours later, another text, this time from my mom. She was worried about me and proposed a family dinner to talk everything through. Right. I wasn't walking into that ambush. Instead, I decided to flip the script. If my family thought they could manipulate me with pressure, I was about to apply some of my own. My first move was on social media. I made a simple post. Nothing dramatic, nothing that mentioned them directly. Just a photo of my new house, the afternoon sun hitting it just right with the caption, "Finally home, worked hard for this and it's all mine." The response was immediate. Friends and extended family flooded the comments with congratulations, telling me how much I deserved it. And then the real fun began. Serena didn't comment, but I knew she saw it. A few hours later, another text message from her landed. This time, the tone wasn't so polite. She berated me for being selfish and accused me of embarrassing her by making my purchase public. Apparently, several of her friends had started asking why she wasn't also buying a house if her brother could afford one. Her fragile ego had taken a direct hit and she was furious. Then came the phone call. This time it was my father. The pretense of concern was gone. The "we're family" rhetoric was abandoned. He was incandescent with rage, accusing me of humiliating them and being an ungrateful son. I let him rant, holding the phone away from my ear. When he finally wound down and demanded to know what I was going to do to fix it, I gave him a one-word answer. Nothing. That's when the threats started. If I didn't do the right thing, I would never be welcome in their home again. My response sounds like a win-win to me. For the first time in my entire life, I felt no guilt for standing my ground. I didn't feel like I owed them a single thing because the truth was I didn't. I blocked Serena's number. I muted my parents' calls. Then I ordered takeout from my favorite barbecue place, cracked open a cold drink, and sat on my new porch, watching the sunset over the property I had earned. For the first time, I felt utterly and completely free. The silence, however, didn't last. By the next morning, my inbox was a battlefield. Serena had gone into a full-scale public meltdown. My parents were in damage control mode. Apparently, some of our extended family members who saw my post had started asking pointed questions. My parents, obsessed with appearances, didn't want anyone outside their immediate circle to know just how dysfunctional things had become. I could practically hear their panicked conversations. My mother desperately trying to spin a narrative where she didn't look like a villain, and my father grumbling about family loyalty and how I had betrayed them. And Serena, well, she had gone nuclear. Not only was she ranting in the family group chat, but she was now airing her grievances publicly on social media. I scrolled through her latest posts, long, melodramatic captions about how difficult her life was, how she had been betrayed by those she trusted most, and how she was struggling to find a place to call home. I nearly choked on my morning coffee when I saw she had started an online fundraising page. That's right. She launched a campaign titled, "Help Serena Get the Home She Deserves." The audacity was almost impressive. The description was even better. She painted herself as the long-suffering sister whose cold-hearted brother had abandoned her in her hour of need. She conveniently omitted the part where she was expecting a free house she had done nothing to earn. The result of her plea, a grand total of $20, likely donated by one of her equally entitled friends. I had to admit I was a little disappointed. If you're going to commit to the grift, at least make it convincing. Still, the situation was escalating into absurdity. I needed to put a stop to it before it spiraled further. I had no desire to engage in a public family feud, but I also wasn't going to let them slander my name. So I decided it was time to drop the final bomb. I made a second post. This time, however, I included some receipts. I posted the unaltered screenshots of Serena's text messages, the ones where she explicitly admitted to scheming with my parents to coerce me into giving her my house. I added no commentary of my own, just the screenshots with a simple caption. Just clearing up some misunderstandings. The internet did the rest. Within hours, the tide had turned. People started calling her out in the comments. Friends who had previously offered blind support went silent. A few even turned on her, realizing they had been manipulated. Serena promptly deleted her fundraising page and set all her social media accounts to private. My parents were also feeling the heat. Apparently, a few aunts and uncles had decided to call them directly, demanding to know why they thought it was acceptable to demand a house from their son while coddling their daughter. By the end of the day, the family group chat was dead silent. No more guilt-tripping texts, no more passive-aggressive calls, just silence. And it was glorious. I leaned back in my chair and watched the sun dip below the horizon, my phone blissfully free of notifications. I had a cold drink in my hand, a good playlist on the speaker, and for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't worried about what my family thought or if I had done the right thing. I had done the right thing for me, and that was more than enough. The quiet lasted for an entire week. No calls, no texts, nothing. I kept expecting one last desperate play from my parents, but for the first time, they seemed to understand that I wasn't going to budge. Maybe the public humiliation had finally registered. Maybe they were just regrouping. Either way, I wasn't about to get comfortable. Then, just as I was starting to settle into my new, peaceful life, another delivery arrived. Certified mail. A thick manila envelope with my parents' return address, the kind that never contains good news. I sat at my kitchen table, a fresh coffee in one hand and a letter opener in the other, steeling myself for whatever drama was inside. It was a legal notice. My parents were threatening to sue me. I had to read it twice to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. According to the document, they were claiming I had misled them into believing I was purchasing the house for the benefit of the family, and that I had unjustly enriched myself at their expense. It was patently absurd. I had never promised anyone my house, but their desperation had clearly reached a new, unhinged level. The best part, they were demanding financial restitution for the emotional distress I had caused Serena. That's right. She was so traumatized by not receiving a free house that they believed she was entitled to monetary compensation. I did what any rational person would do in that situation. I laughed. Then I called my lawyer. The conversation was brief. My lawyer, barely containing his amusement, confirmed that the lawsuit had absolutely no chance of succeeding in court. At best, it was a scare tactic. At worst, it was a final, flailing attempt to coerce me into submission. Either way, I wasn't worried, but I also wasn't going to let it slide. If they wanted to escalate, I would meet them there. I made a few more calls. One to my bank to triple-check that everything was locked down, and another to a locksmith to upgrade the security on my new home. Then, I did something I knew would push them completely over the edge. I had my lawyer draft and send a formal response via certified mail, informing my parents that any further contact that could be construed as harassment would be met with a restraining order and a countersuit for legal fees. 2 days later, the phone calls started again. First my mother, then my father, and finally Serena. I ignored them all. Some left tearful, pleading voicemails, others continued with the guilt trip. My mother, S, was a masterpiece of manipulation. She toggled from weepy to furious in a single message, demanding to know how I could abandon my own family over something as trivial as a house. Trivial. The irony nearly made me spit out my drink. Why were they willing to go to court over something so trivial? Finally, on the third day, when my father called, I answered. He skipped the pleasantries and got straight to the point. They would drop everything if I would just agree to work something out with Serena. I told him flatly that there was nothing to work out. That was the final straw for him. He exploded, launching into a tirade about how selfish I was, how I had betrayed them, and how no son of his would ever treat his family this way. It was the same tired speech I had heard 100 times. This time, however, it had no effect. I felt nothing. I let him vent until he ran out of steam. When he was finally done, I simply said, "I have nothing more to say to you." I wished him well, told him I hoped they could all move on, and I hung up the phone. And that was it. The legal threats evaporated. The guilt trip ceased. My parents finally seemed to grasp that I was not giving in. Serena went completely radio silent. Either she finally realized she wasn't getting anything from me, or she had found a new target to latch onto. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly liberated. No more manipulation, no more obligation. Just me, my house, and a future that was entirely my own. I had won. The first few weeks of actual freedom were disorienting. I had spent so much of my life braced for the next round of manipulation that it felt strange to wake up without a sense of dread, without checking my phone for a passive-aggressive text or anticipating a family ambush. My house started to feel less like a fortress I had to defend and more like a home. For the first time, I could actually focus on myself. I developed a healthy routine, waking up early, going to the gym, and cooking real meals instead of grabbing takeout on the run. I finally had the time and mental space to enjoy simple things, like sitting on my porch with a coffee and just watching the neighborhood wake up. It was a kind of peace I never knew I was missing. But of course, that kind of peace never lasts entirely undisturbed. One afternoon, while working from home, there was a knock at the door. I knew, with a weary sense of intuition, who it was before I even looked through the peephole. Sure enough, it was Serena. She stood on my porch looking less like the entitled sister I grew up with and more like a door-to-door salesperson on the last day of a failing sales quarter. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a veneer of desperation. Almost. I didn't invite her in. I stepped outside and stood with my arms crossed, waiting for her to deliver whatever lines she had rehearsed. She started with awkward, strained small talk, as if she were reading from a bad script. Then she got to the real reason she was there. She'd done a lot of thinking and realized she'd been a little unfair. She told me she wasn't looking for a house anymore, just a place to stay. Just for a little while. I almost laughed. A little while. Right. And then what? I let her move in, and suddenly I'm covering her expenses while she lounges on my couch and complains about how life isn't fair. Not a chance. I kept my response simple. Our parents have always bent over backwards for you. Why not stay with them? That's when the whole truth spilled out. She wasn't welcome there anymore. Apparently, the public fallout from our drama had done a number on our parents' reputation. Relatives who had once enabled their behavior were now keeping their distance. Even Serena's own friends had started to drift away. It turns out that when you go viral for trying to swindle your own brother, people tend to not want to be associated with you. Serena wasn't just looking for a place to crash. She was looking for an escape from the mess she had created. I didn't take the bait. I told her I wasn't interested in playing that role for her anymore. No hard feelings, but I was done cleaning up her messes. The moment I said it, her demeanor shifted. The faux humility vanished, replaced by the same old entitled rage. She called me selfish and spouted some nonsense about how family is supposed to stick together. I just shrugged. She stormed off, making a dramatic exit that might have worked when we were children, but now all I felt was a profound sense of relief. A few days later, I was at the mall picking up a few things. As I stood in line at a coffee shop, I heard a familiar, grating voice. It was Serena, talking loudly to someone at a nearby table. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but when your sister's voice has the subtlety of a foghorn, it's hard to avoid. She was complaining at length about how hard life was and how she had to get this job. An actual job, like a normal person. She whined about how stressful it was and how she couldn't believe people did this every single day. The woman she was with looked like she was biting her tongue to keep from telling Serena that, yes, that is what the majority of the human population has always done. I bit my lip to keep from laughing. It was just too perfect. I didn't say a word. I just got my coffee and walked past her table. She didn't even see me. But as I walked out into the sunlight, I couldn't help but smile. For the first time in my life, Serena's problems were not my problems. Her tirade about the injustices of the world was being directed at someone else. And you know what? I was perfectly okay with that. Later that evening, I got one last text from my mother. It was a final, desperate attempt to guilt me into reconsidering. Something about how family sticks together, and how she couldn't believe how cold I'd become. I deleted it without a reply. For years, they had made it perfectly clear that I wasn't really part of the family unless I was serving a purpose for them. Now, I finally understood something vital. I wasn't cold. I was just done.